Transferring college debt and no dumbest bill in America. This is Mark Fisher with Mark and the Millennials. And the millennial joining me today is, of course, Christopher Hopkins, our producer on the other side of the camera. Welcome, everyone, to this episode of Mark and the Millennials. This episode is called Transferring College Debt. Did you notice I didn't say canceling college debt like the Democrats say? They say we're canceling college debt when, in fact, when you tell one person who indebted themselves for college tuition that they no longer have to pay that tuition, that means the debt is transferred to the rest of American taxpayers. Someone has to pay it. It's not like it just disappears, but that, of course, is Democrat Economics 101. They think when you cancel the debt, it just goes away and no one ever has to pay it. Not true. And there's another aspect of this particular bill that drives me crazy, or this particular edict that drives me crazy, which I'm going to discuss in a moment. But first up, in the Wall Street Journal, just to give you the facts about what Biden is doing as it relates to transferring student debt, Biden to announce student loan forgiveness plan. The president plans to forgive $10,000 or more in federal student debt for tens of millions of Americans. President Biden is planning to take executive action to forgive $10,000 or more in federal student loan debt for tens of millions of Americans, a move that would provide unprecedented relief for borrowers, but is certain to draw political and legal challenges. Following more than a year of internal White House debate, the president is set to announce later Wednesday that he will cancel $10,000 in federal loan debt for borrowers who make under $125,000 a year, or couples making less than $250,000 a year, according to people familiar with the matter. Those who receive the federal Pell Grants and make less than $125,000 a year will be eligible for total forgiveness of up to $20,000, some of the people said. So I have to stop there in this Wall Street article, ladies and gentlemen, for the following reasons. Since when, in our republic, which operates with a constitution, does the president of the United States have the power to issue an edict that tells you you no longer have to pay a loan? So wouldn't that require, for example, Congress to pass a bill? Wouldn't it require the House of Representatives in Congress to pass a bill saying, hey, if you make less than $125K a year, we're going to forgive $10,000 of your college debt. And then that bill would pass the House and then go to the Senate, and the Senate would pass it, and then the president would sign the bill. Then you would have our actual bill, which we can still debate, of course, the merits of that, and we'll talk about it in a moment. But that isn't what happened. President Biden is signing an executive order. It's like he's issuing an edict like a king, which tells you that we are living, once again, in post-constitutional America, when a president of the United States can get between you and the lender and say, hey, you don't have to pay it back. It's just not required. We know you made this loan. We know that you don't want to pay it back, because I would imagine most people, when they borrow, would actually prefer not to pay back the loan. But we're going to give you free money as long as you make $125K or less a year, which is pretty extraordinary, right? Because the last time I checked, the average American in the United States made what, Chris? 45, 50K a year. What's the average salary in the U.S.? Chris is looking that up, because the fact of the matter is, I'm sure it's not $125,000 a year.
$56,000.
$56,000 a year. So I was pretty close. I said 55. The average American, Chris Hopkins, our producer, just confirmed, makes about $56,000 a year. But this edict from Biden says you can make up to $125,000 a year, or couples $250,000 a year, and you don't have to pay the $10,000 of your student debt. The rest of it you have to pay, but you get $10,000 just lobbed off the top. And so we have to ask ourselves the question, aren't we being governed now by edict? because this edict has come out right before an election. Right before an election, we have a president whose party is in major trouble nationwide in all of the polls that are being released. And that Democrat Party is in major trouble because they are running this country into the ground. And the president of the United States has the right to basically just say, I'm going to, across the board, give everybody $10,000 who went to college. But what about the electrician or the plumber, the carpenter, the excavator, the roofer? What about all those people and everyone else in all the trades? What about people who work in manufacturing and factories who didn't go to college? Why don't they get a check for $10,000? Oh, no, it's worse than that. Not only do they not get the $10K, but the $10K of debt is being transferred to them. The people who can least afford it, who are making $56,000 a year, are assuming the debt from people who are making $125,000 a year. I think that pretty much narrows down what this bill actually does. And it's not a bill. I keep saying it's a bill. It's not. It's an edict, right? Because we've given so much power to the federal government and to the federal agencies that the president of the United States can, just sign these edicts and it's a law. It's just the way it is. And he can help his party along the way because why, ladies and gentlemen? Millennials went into massive amounts of debt. And so are current students, to be fair. They went into massive amounts of debt to go to college, many of whom got degrees that were worthless. That was their choice. They got degrees that were worthless, some of them. Many others did not. They got great degrees. But nonetheless, they entered into this debt arrangement, and now they don't have to pay it back. So why does this matter? It matters because the millennials are going to be driven to the polls. That's what the president of the United States is hoping will happen. He's hoping that you will say, thank you, Mr. President, for the $10,000. I'm going to go now and vote for Democrats in Congress because I realize that's how I get all the free stuff. My life isn't controlled by me anymore and the actions that I take and the decisions that I make. Oh, no. My life and its outcome and how well I do in life is going to be controlled by you, the Democrat Party and the government, because it's all going to depend on how much you're willing to give me. And that's exactly the Democrat Party in the 21st century. Buying people off, buying everybody off, and you buy them off with as much money as it takes before they finally vote for you and become dependent. And once you're dependent, there's no going back. I got news for you. There's no going back. And so you hear so many people who are baby boomers talk about how when they went to college and they had to pay their debt off. And I'm going to be that guy. I graduated from college and I think I had $10,000 roughly in debt, approximately. And to me, that was, because it was true then, it was all the money in the world. It was a ton of money. It still is a lot of money, of course. And at that time, I had to pay it off. And the terms back then were not as friendly as the terms are today with getting student loans. But I remember that was the beginning at the time I was in college, was kind of the beginning of the student loan program. I was thankful there was a student loan program. I was thankful that banks were willing to give you the loans or that the colleges were willing to give you the loans because that enabled me to go to college, okay? So I had to put that out there first. However, I knew that I had to pay that back. I knew I could not transfer that debt to my parents. They were not willing to pay for it. Boy, how things have changed today where parents feel responsible for paying the college debt of their children, but not with the boomers. With the boomers, it's like the parents said, hey, if you can't afford college, if you can't figure it out, that's not my problem. That's your problem. How things have changed. And I have to wonder if President Reagan, back in the day when I was in college and then got out, he was still president of the United States, if he said, hey, I'm going to wipe out your debt, will you vote for me? Of course that would have an impact. I mean, so many people would say, wow, that's just wonderful. You know who would love it the most? The colleges, ladies and gentlemen. The colleges. Because if I run a college And let's just say I start my own college and it's a privately owned college. And of course, I participate in all of these different student loan programs and so forth. Let's just say that happened. Of course, I would love it if the government forgave loans for colleges, because what's going to happen? I'm probably going to be able to raise prices a lot easier, because now the conventional wisdom is by the current students or students entering college that, hey, if a Democrat gets in office, I can rely on that Democrat giving me free money for my tuition. And so the Democrats' real goal, ladies and gentlemen, and I have to ask you to ask yourself the question, and here is the thesis here. What is the real goal of the Democrat Party? Well, as we've already said, number one, the goal is to drive millennials to the polls and vote Democrat. But there's another goal, and that is to create a new entitlement so that all college is free, all higher ed is free, no matter where you go, no matter how badly you do in school, no matter how poorly you choose a major, no matter if you're marketable or not when you graduate. None of that really matters to the Democrats. They just want a new entitlement, because if they can get this entitlement through, imagine being the Republican then that says, this shouldn't be an entitlement. We should remove this entitlement. And this is the problem with ever-expanding government. It's very hard for the opposition party, although I will tell you, I'd be happy to be that person, but it's very hard for the opposition party to come back and say, no, this shouldn't be an entitlement. It's not fair. It's not fair. It shouldn't be free. You should have to pay for it. And it's part of your responsibility. It shouldn't be the taxpayer's responsibility. And by the way, the Democrats say it's the government that's paying for it. Yeah, right. It's the taxpayers that are paying for it. But there's another whole aspect of this student loan forgiveness that is incredibly troublesome. And that is, we have a situation in the United States where we have inflation, and obviously the transferring of college debt is inflationary. And we have this issue of never-ending expanding government. There's never an end, it seems, to how big government can get. And the fact that people are no longer outraged by it. At least that's my sense, Chris. I don't think people are outraged by the size of government anymore. I don't think they believe that it's so awful that government is just getting so big and so out of control that it's a labyrinth wrapped around every single individual, as individual rights are being wiped out little by little, and individual freedom is being wiped out because of the dependency that we have on government. And so I would like to provide a suggestion. Since the Democrats are in control of the Congress, obviously right now, and the President of the United States feels like he can do this by edict, which is wrong. By the way, Trump shouldn't have been able to do it by edict either. I just want to put that out there. I forgot to say this. Donald Trump suspended your payments on your college debt during the pandemic. Now, while that may have made sense because the government also shut down your ability to actually make an income, it was still an edict. Congress should have passed a bill that gave that a definitive beginning and a definitive end if it was really important. So it was just as wrong under the Trump administration as it is today with the Biden administration. And so I ask all of you podcast listeners this question. Shouldn't there, for all new entitlements and existing entitlements, be skin in the game? Shouldn't we all have skin in the game? Those of us who get some sort of benefit, such as $10,000 of free college money. Why is it that there is an edict passed or an edict signed to give you $10K and you don't have to do anything in return? Shouldn't there be some sort of condition? I mean, throughout human history, people are always going to want the free stuff. And we know the Democrat Party is all out to destroy the United States Constitution and the United States. It's very clear with all of these entitlements. But what if the college students were required, in order to have their $10,000 of debt transferred to the taxpayers, since the Democrats are in charge. Obviously, I don't support this, but since the Democrats are in charge, we don't really have a choice at the moment. Why isn't there some sort of linkage to a requirement that those receiving the 10K actually have to do something? Maybe, I don't know, take a course in how to manage money. How about that? Right? An online course is fine. Like, I'll tell you what, we'll give you the $10,000 of free college debt. We'll lob off 10K of what you currently owe. But you have to take an online course that lasts for 6 months. And the purpose of the course is to teach you how to properly manage money and how money works in a society, certainly our society, and how you make money, how you spend money, how you save money, how you invest money, and the importance of understanding the way our capitalist and free market system works. That would be really great then, okay? Then at least there'd be some sort of linkage between debt forgiveness and learning something that would be beneficial to these individuals for the rest of their lives. Namely, don't take out loans you can't pay. At least that's what I think would work. Maybe, and Chris, maybe you can opine on this, maybe the Republicans, when they take over Congress, maybe this is what they should do, right? Because obviously, once the Republicans take over, you and I both know they're not going to try to reverse this. They're going to go, oh, well, it's not our fault. The president of the United States signed an edict, so we can't overturn the edict. Well, of course they could. They could pass a bill. They could pass a bill to take that authority away from the president of the United States and have it returned to where it belongs, which is the elected officials, number one. So the Republicans, aren't going to do anything. And this is what bothers me. All right. I know you're going to say, well, how do you know they're not going to do anything? Of course they're not. What Republican, once elected, is going to get into Congress and say, hey, now that we're the majority, let's take that $10,000 back and make people pay it off? They're not going to do that. They're not going to do that. And this is the problem with expanding government, because the opposition party really isn't an opposition party anymore. They're not willing to take the hard votes. So here's a compromise. Why don't the Republicans pass a bill that requires every single American who has received any kind of student loan forgiveness to take this course in financial literacy? I have a good friend in Maryland who's a Democrat. Hard to believe, I know, because I don't have very many Democrat friends, but I have one. And this individual is a very successful Black Democrat elected official. And he, interestingly enough, put a bill in every year for financial literacy in a state legislature. Every single year, because he saw how his fellow Black brethren, if you will, and he would say this himself, he called them his brothers, and that was his words. He would say, you know what, I don't understand how these folks don't understand how to manage money. And obviously it's a huge failure in our education system, not just K to 12, but higher ed as well. The fact that you can go through K to 12 and higher ed and never actually learn this is kind of remarkable. So he would put the bill in every year, and every single year, the Democrat majority, and he was a Democrat as well, would kill the bill. They would always say, oh, it's such a great idea. So they would pass out of one chamber and then kill it in the other chamber. They would always play this game with him to make him feel like he was getting something done. But of course, the bill doesn't become law until it passes both chambers and the governor signs it in that particular state. But this gentleman was very prescient because he saw how so many people who were both Black and white, but certainly in my state, it was skewed to Black homes predominantly, or skewed to Black homes, let's put it that way, where they lost their homes when home mortgages became so easy to get. And his point was, man, once you have a home, it's such a cool thing to have a house. It's such an important thing. It's such a huge accomplishment. You never want to give that house up, not without a fight. And so many individuals got these easy loans where the loan would escalate up because it was a loan that had the automatic trigger every year where the loan would increase with interest rates because it wasn't a fixed rate loan. And before you know it, as interest rates went up, these individuals could no longer afford their payment, so they just walked away. And his point was, this was such a huge problem in the Black community, then why don't we have financial literacy courses that are a requirement in K-12 education in order to prepare these individuals for a more successful future? And time again, in the Democrat legislature, he could not pass this bill, even though it makes perfect sense. You have to ask yourself the question, why? Why are the Democrats so against financial literacy? Because, and I already have the answer, because Democrats don't want you to be independent. Fundamentally, they oppose any bill, at least as a party, they oppose any bill that enables you to have an independent life, because independence, financial independence, is really true freedom. When you have financial freedom, you are then really and truly free, and the Democrats cannot rely on the votes of people who are truly free, which is why they oppose financial literacy courses, and which is why they want you to become dependent and pay you $10,000 to get you dependent and to get you to vote for them. And that's take this loan and shove it. Next up, podcast listeners, an $80 billion IRS expansion. $80 billion. So Congress has decided, in their infinite wisdom, to expand the IRS and fund it with $80 billion. Okay. So in the Wall Street Journal, it says something is wrong at the Internal Revenue Service. And it continues, as seen by the furor over its $80 billion appropriation in the Inflation Reduction Act. How do you like that? A bill to reduce inflation, which actually spends a lot of money and gives the IRS $80 billion. Does anyone see the connection there? Democrats are calling this the Inflation Reduction Act. So what they're doing is they're funding the IRS with $80 billion. That's because the IRS is going to be tasked with shaking every single American down, certainly those in red states, and middle America is going to be shaken down. And that's how they're going to reduce the federal deficit and reduce inflation, by taking more money out of your pocket and giving it to the government. I can't make this up. About 57% of the money in the IRS $80 billion appropriation will be spent on enforcement, while less than 4% goes to taxpayer service, the Congressional Research Service estimates. And CRS, by the way, is the bellwether in Congress, which measures where the bill's money actually goes. The bill has its priorities upside down. The agency is called the Internal Revenue Service, and service has been neglected. Yeah, that's true. Have you ever tried calling the IRS for advice? It's like, hey, look, I'm having some trouble filing my taxes online. I got a question about line 50A, B, C, D, F, subsection 2. Can you help me? Well, good luck getting an answer. And then good luck getting someone who even knows what they're talking about at the IRS. You've seen the headlines. This is, again, the Wall Street Journal. The IRS recently shredded 30 million paper returns because it couldn't scan them. The agency is sitting on a backlog of 17 million unprocessed returns. Callers with questions wait on hold for hours. And with 4.75 million pieces of unanswered taxpayer correspondence piled on their desks, the IRS may not write back anytime soon. Instead of conducting itself like a Kremlin bureaucracy, the IRS should brush up on customer service. So this editorial in the Wall Street Journal is basically saying that the $80 billion the IRS is receiving should be focused on helping customers to file their taxes and to properly answer questions and to have a really good customer service desk with, let's say, thousands of people who would then help you do the right thing. And so herein lies, ladies and gentlemen, before we go into what this bill really is, what its purpose really is, herein lies really the question that I have for everyone in America today, and that is, rather than giving the IRS $80 billion to expand customer service so that they can help you file these unbelievably complicated tax returns. Try being self-employed and you'll really see how hard it is. Why not just make the tax code simpler? Right? So the IRS, these aren't elected officials. The elected officials in Congress, the House of Representatives, and the U.S. Senate can change the tax code and make the tax code really simple if they want by saying that you pay a flat tax, right? What is your annual income? Then here is your flat federal tax. Send it in. That would save an enormous amount of time and an enormous amount of money. But I will be the first to say this. The tax code as it is currently written in America definitely favors those who can afford the best possible tax attorneys and advice and counsel. Those people who can afford that are the ones who benefit from this highly complicated tax code. So why don't we just simplify the tax code then? Because then that would definitely level the playing field and make the $80 billion not necessary. But that's not what the Democrats really want the $80 billion for. And that is, in part, largely what this editorial is about in the Wall Street Journal, as well as many of the other articles that you will read, namely that the real purpose of the $80 billion given to the IRS is to hire a bunch of agents that will then audit Americans. And who is going to get audited? The middle class and small and medium-sized businesses. Big businesses, highly, really, really wealthy people, they're not going to get audited. Or if they do, they'll be like in the Virgin Islands, while their office in Cincinnati is being audited because they have the money to be able to hire so many people to protect them from this $80 billion enforcement agency. And this is what's dangerous about where government has gone. We have a government that's being made by edict, laws being made by edict, and now we have this IRS push for $80 billion. And rather than do what's necessary, which is to simplify the tax code, they want to shake down their enemies. The Democrats do. And we know who works at the IRS. Remember Lois Lerner? I'll tell you who works at the IRS. It's predominantly people on the left. Of course they are. Where do you think the IRS is headquartered? It's headquartered in Washington, D.C. What party affiliation is most of the people who live in Washington, D.C., Northern Virginia, and suburban Maryland? Not just Democrats, but far left Democrats. Those are the people that work there. They're all too happy to shake you down if you're a small businessman or if you are a helpless middle class struggling person living in middle America somewhere because, you're deplorable. They want to shake you down anyway. God forbid you might have voted for Donald Trump. All the more reason to audit you. This is what is dangerous about this massive expansion. And I have my own story to tell you about this. It's actually quite fascinating. Years ago, I put a bill in for the business personal property tax. Anyone out there know what that is? It's called the business personal property tax. Many states across America have this. In some states, it's handled a little bit differently. They call it the personal property tax, where they tax your car every year. It's kind of like a sales tax on your car every year. Virginia has such a tax. Maryland, however, has a business personal property tax, and that tax is levied on all of the equipment owned by your business every single year. It's like paying a sales tax on all of your equipment that your business owns, but you pay it every year. So yeah, you do pay the sales tax when you buy the equipment, but in Maryland, you pay this business personal property tax, the sales tax kind of thing every year. So let's just say you have an office that is 3 stories and you have 100 computers and you have printers and you have all different kinds. Oh, your office equipment, for example, your tables and your desks and your conference room and your chairs and All of that stuff is considered personal property in Maryland and many other states, by the way, not just this state. And you are taxed on it every year. And you have to report it to the state. So here's my story, and it's related to the IRS. And it demonstrates to you how big government is so dangerous and how it can be weaponized and how it is being weaponized. So I went to a forum. It was for the Chamber of Commerce. It's one of those things that they invite you to, you show up and they ask you questions. And they said, what's one of your priorities if you're elected? I said, well, I want to get rid of the business personal property tax. And then I got elected and I put a bill in to eliminate the business personal property tax because the tax disincentivizes you from buying equipment, which is really kind of stupid, which means you have less jobs and you have people not investing in equipment and in technology in your state. And so a very powerful Senate president in my state, a state Senate president, was listening. You know, he'd been the longest serving state Senate president in American history. Okay. And I happened to be in the House of Delegates, which was in his district. And he was listening to me and I put the bill in, all that stuff. And literally within 4 to 5 weeks, I was being audited. My company, my very small company, and it is a small company, was being audited by the personal property tax division from my state. So I put a bill in to eliminate the business personal property tax for everyone in the state except people that were in my industry. And the reason I did that was so that there would be no conflict of interest. So I was really careful, right? So no one could say, oh, the reason you're putting that bill in is to make yourself richer. Oh, no. My bill would eliminate it for everybody, but not for people in my specific industry. And this idiot, this longest serving president in the United States, I have no doubt instructed and weaponized that department to audit me. And this audit took place over a period of at least 6 or 7 months. And I had to pay a tax attorney, okay, not an accountant, not a CPA, a tax attorney to defend me. And the tax attorney had to go all the way to their offices, which was, like an hour away, and had to spend hours and hours there as they asked him question after question after question about my business personal property tax return, which is independent of the tax return. Unbelievable. Look, when you have a lack of check and balance in government, when you have departments that are empowered with so much money like the IRS is being expanded by $80 billion, you're going to have a weaponization of these agencies because they become so powerful. And because government and regulation in government and the tax code has gotten so complicated, unnecessarily so, it's very easy to play gotcha by these agencies. It's very easy. And if someone really wants to get you, they can get you. I am convinced of that. And that's why I wanted to eliminate the business personal property tax in Maryland, because it is a gotcha tax. It is stupid. It makes no sense. It is anti-business. More importantly, it's anti-technology and anti-investment. It's stupid. But nonetheless, an individual is able to weaponize that department against an opponent. And that is what the Democrats are doing with the $80 billion IRS expansion. And it is wrong, ladies and gentlemen. And if you work for the IRS, right? If you work for the IRS, you're probably thinking, oh, great, we're going to have more enforcement. We're going to be able to make sure everybody's held accountable. But if you have a few friends in the IRS that work there, and you're now the president of the United States, or a very powerful bureaucrat, or you're a very partisan individual that happens to be working in that department, you might decide on who to audit based solely on their party affiliation, or on their Facebook posts, or on their social media posts, or on what things they Google. And why wouldn't the Democrats just provide a list to the newly expanded IRS? Why wouldn't the Democrat Party at this point just say, hey, look, here's a list of 100 million Americans that we'd like you to audit. And we prioritize the list from 1 to 100 million. And we want you to go shake these people down because that will shut them up when they try to criticize us. That is the purpose of this bill from the Democrat perspective. It has nothing to do with anything, in my opinion, other than shaking opponents down. It is wrong. I've been a victim of this already myself, and the American people ought not stand for this. And we have to throw the Democrats out of power, and we have to simplify the tax code so that we don't need to expand the IRS. That's the answer. So next up, podcast listeners, banning ESG in Florida. That's right. I didn't say MSG. I said ESG. So Governor Ron DeSantis, this is the New York Post, has banned ESG agenda. He's banned the agenda of them from the state pension investments of Florida. So what does that mean? This is important. This is important because this goes to how people are going to be controlled, ironically, with their own money. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has banned the state's pension funds from considering so-called environmental, social, and governance standards, otherwise known as ESG, when making investments for retirees. So I just want to explain this before I read on. So states have pension funds. Those pension funds are from the teachers' unions or from the teachers and or from the state employees. And so the state creates these pension funds, the people pay into them, hopefully, and the state sometimes adds money to it. So then you have a pretty massive fund over a period of time. That fund has to be invested somewhere so that the pensions can be paid of the retirees when they retire, as well as, by the way, the health insurance. And so the goal of these pension funds is to really earn money so that they remain solvent. That's it in a nutshell. But there's this thing called environmental, social, and governance standards, also known as ESG, that is finding its way into the pension systems and other big, large investments. Governor DeSantis, who has frequently blasted businesses for engaging in woke politics, aka Disney, is chairman of Florida's 3-member state board of administration and had personally backed a resolution imposing the ban that was passed on Tuesday. The resolution directs fund managers to instead invest state resources in a way that prioritizes the highest return on the investment. Imagine that. Without considering what DeSantis described as the ideological agenda of ESG guidelines. So DeSantis is saying, look, the goal of the pension investment system is to make money and to keep it solvent so they can continue to pay health insurance and retirees, which is the deal that they made when they paid into the retirement system. Its goal is not to be involved in ESG investments, which are risky in many cases, and some cases don't make money at all, but lose money. Corporate power, according to DeSantis, has increasingly been utilized to impose an ideological agenda on the American people through the perversion of financial investment priorities under the euphemistic banners of environmental, social, and corporate governance and diversity, inclusion, and equity, DeSantis said in a statement. With the resolution we passed today, the tax dollars and proxy votes of the people of Florida will no longer be commandeered by Wall Street financial firms and used to implement policies through the boardroom that Floridians reject at the ballot box. Look, this is why I read this article, because of that statement. So Florida has a resolution that passed that says the tax dollars and the proxy votes of the people of Florida will no longer be commandeered by Wall Street financial firms and used to implement policies in Florida through the boardroom that Floridians rejected at the ballot box, aka Disney. Remember Disney? Disney tried to do the exact same thing. Well, we're Walt Disney. We're like this massive corporation, and we may be headquartered in Burbank, but we have this massive presence in Orlando. And you, Florida, cannot pass bills unless you get our approval first. And of course, DeSantis threw them aside and said, say goodbye to your tax status, your special tax district status. Bye-bye. And now DeSantis is saying, hey, look, if we have $100 billion in a pension fund in Florida and we want to invest it in Wall Street, what we are not going to allow is that $100 billion to be put forth for social corporate governance and diversity, inclusion, and equity stuff and environmental stuff, and only those things. Rather, we want it to be spent to make money. And this is, to me, the exact kind of governor we want in America. Again, back to the article. The resolution marked the latest instance of DeSantis's confrontational relationship with corporations that attempt to wade into political issues. The Florida governor famously clashed with Disney executives earlier this year after CEO Bob Chapek publicly opposed Florida's Republican-backed Don't Say Gay law, which, of course, the law never said. But here's what I think is interesting. Throughout my entire life, all I've heard is the Democrats that I know say, Republicans are the party of big business. Republicans are, the guys that are in the back room smoking cigars and making all the money, and the Democrats are the poor people. When in fact, the modern 21st century Republican Party is actually the party in America that is fighting these large corporations who are extremely powerful and think that laws don't apply to them and that they can circumvent laws with your money that's working against you and not win at the ballot box, but just control you financially. So we have a Republican in Florida and the entire Republican Party that is fighting against these large corporations and this woke corporate power. So the parties, the Democrat Party and the Republican Party, have managed to flip one century over another. Because the modern Republican Party of the 21st century is the party of the working men and women. Emphasis on working men and women. And to protect them from this overbearing and out of control corporate power that is corrupting our politics at the state level and at the federal level. Just to give you an idea, Florida's 30 state pension funds have approximately $240 billion under management. Think about that. If I handed to you, because you were a money manager, $240 billion, okay? You deposited that check in your bank. And I said to you, I need you to earn money on this $240 billion so we can continue to provide payments to our retirees who are retiring every single day in Florida who once worked for the state or the counties. And so I need you to earn money on this so it remains solvent so people can have a comfortable retirement. That was the deal that we made. So here's $240 billion. Go manage it. And you then say, well, I'm only going to invest the $240 billion in climate change initiatives. Only. And you're like, no, that's not what I asked you to do. I asked you to invest the $240 billion in the things that actually make money, like safe investments that generate income that we can use to pay retirees as they retire. And so DeSantis is saying, we're not going to allow you to use our pension money against us and to try to put us out of business and use even some of the pension money to hire attorneys and lobbyists in Washington to undermine the voters in Florida. It makes perfect sense, and it should make perfect sense to everyone that's out there. So good for DeSantis for doing this, and even better for the Republican Party that we are solidifying our hold on the working men and women, emphasis on the people that are actually working and go to work every day and love to work and live for their families and work for their families. Those are the people that we represent. The Democrats represent the big corporations and the people who are on the couch, period. It's really that simple. So next up, podcast listeners, Bill de Blasio, you're going to laugh when I say this, Chris. Bill de Blasio is coming to a Harvard classroom this fall. I can't make this up. Again, it's in the Wall Street Journal. Must be true. Bill de Blasio is coming to a Harvard classroom this fall. The former New York City mayor will be a fellow this fall, which means he's going to be a professor at Harvard University's government and public health schools, the university said. This is ridiculous. Mr. de Blasio, who ended his congressional run in New York last month, is set to be a fellow in Cambridge, Massachusetts this fall, the university said Wednesday, at Harvard. He will be a senior leadership fellow at Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health and a visiting fellow at Harvard Kennedy School's Institute of Politics, the school said. As a fellow, he will hold office hours, meet with students and faculty, and teach at least one class, according to the public health school. Will that class be how to kill groundhogs? I'm just curious, asking for a friend. How to ruin a city? How to ruin the largest and greatest American city? How to ruin one of the greatest cities in the world? How to run it into the ground? I don't know. Maybe the course could be about how to clean up fecal matter on city streets, human fecal matter. I don't know. They're endless. Can you think of any, Chris? So many courses, so little time that Bill de Blasio could teach. But I digress. Here is the article. Mr. de Blasio's class would draw on his personal experience with leadership, strategy, and policy as the New York mayor, a spokesman for the public health school said. His focus is expected to include case studies from the pandemic and other health challenges he faced during his administration. Mr. de Blasio, a Democrat, was the mayor from 2014 to 2021. He mounted 2 failed campaigns in recent years, a long shot to run for president in 2019, and a bid he ended last month to represent New York's 10th congressional district. The Harvard gig is a sort of homecoming for Mr. de Blasio, who grew up in Cambridge. He attended New York University and built his career in New York, but he is still loyal to at least 2 Beantown teams, the Boston Red Sox and the New England Patriots. The Institute of Politics at Harvard's Kennedy School said Mr. de Blasio would visit the university several times during the fall semester for discussions and events. I'm sure that'll be like total marijuana-induced, and Sensimilia candy-induced discussions where he gets there. Yeah, New York is just like utopia. It's just such a great place. Because, you might get shot on the street, but hey, that's what makes it so real. Quote, I am happy to join the IOP to help inspire our nation's next generation of leaders to find ways to serve in politics and public service, aim to build a government that serves working people, Mr. de Blasio said in a statement Wednesday. I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen. You have to admit, America's so-called best university, Harvard, and of course that's what so many people think. They always dream of their kid going to Harvard. What university would bring in the biggest failed mayor in American history? David Dinkins of New York was pretty bad because they had blackouts in New York because the guy was just such an idiot. He didn't know what he was doing. De Blasio is far worse. He's the most failed disaster of a mayor ever in American history. And the so-called nation's best university is bringing him on staff and paying him, no doubt, and saying, oh, we can't wait to have you here. You're just going to make a huge difference. Huge difference. You're going to really challenge the students to think the way you do. Just unbelievable. Way to go, Bill de Blasio, and way to go, Harvard, for just confirming why no American should send their kid to that school. Useless. It's useless. And you might say, well, Mark, what about free speech? Bill has a right to talk. Look, Bill's not even qualified to teach at a community college. Right? He's not even qualified there. But Harvard? Come on. What are we thinking? So I'm going to finish the podcast with this lovely story and leave it with you. In the Daily Caller, The United States is likely to go to war with China in the next decade, experts say. The United States and Chinese militaries will clash over a Chinese campaign to take over Taiwan in the near future, experts told the Daily Caller News Foundation. China's unequivocal determination to fully integrate Taiwan with the mainland is compounding U.S. fears of growing Chinese threats to itself and key East Asian allies, setting both sides on a risky path to kinetic conflict, according to experts on defense and China-Taiwan issues. A majority of Americans expect war within the next decade. One that experts said could widen beyond repelling a Taiwanese invasion and test the limit of each side's naval and aerial capabilities. So the reason I'm leaving you with this story, what a great story to leave you with, by the way, is because it was just sent out today by the Daily Caller. And as recently as 2 weeks ago, I had a brief conversation with a very good friend of mine who works in government, as much as I can say at this point. And this individual told me that it's actually not 10 years. Actually, between now and 2024, so we have basically a year and a half, it's some of the most dangerous periods, that 18 months, if you will, year and a half, one of the most dangerous periods in American history since World War II. Namely, that our conflict with China is growing on a daily basis, and it's not just over Taiwan. It's over who controls the world's most important resources, like copper, like lithium, like magnesium, like cobalt, just go down the list. Timber, iron ore, all these things. Who controls the world's resources? With China, it's territory and it's the wealth that exists in Taiwan. Obviously, they want that for China because China is in economic trouble. But there's also the greater picture of who controls the world's resources, which is in large part what the Ukraine is about, right? Agricultural resources in the Ukraine, among other things. And so this is one of the most dangerous times in American history, not just the next 10 years, but currently, where we're sitting right this second is as dangerous as the beginning and during World War II, according to my very dear friend who's at a very high level of government and would very much be in the know. And here we have this article that just came out kind of confirming that. And by the way, I have to tell you this, and I'll leave you with this. In American history, you can rest assured that when these kinds of articles start finding themselves into online papers and newspapers across the country, it's because folks that are in the know want to prepare Americans and ask you to be prepared yourself for what is to come. And it's not going to be pretty. And that's the last word from Mark and the Millennials. Thank you for joining Mark and the Millennials. This is Mark Fisher. Thank you to our producer, Christopher Hopkins. Check us out on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Getter, Truth Social, Rumble, and our website. See you next time.